There is a specific kind of suffering that has no name in polite conversation, not poverty or an illness or grief. Those things at least have the decency to announce themselves. They arrive with a reason. They point at something outside of you and say, here is your enemy, here is the source. This suffering is different. This suffering lives inside the house you chose, inside the job you applied for, inside the relationship you said yes to, inside the life that by every measurable standard is fine, more than fine, good even, comfortable, safe, exactly what you said you wanted, and yet there is a version of you that wakes up at 3 a.m. and lies very still in the dark and thinks, is this it? Is this actually it? Was this the whole thing? Richard Yates published Revolutionary Road in 1961. It is one of the most celebrated and most avoided novels in American literature. Celebrated because the writing is ruthless and precise. Avoided because most people who pick it up and get past the first 50 pages have to put it down, not because it is too sad, but because it is too accurate. Frank and April Wheeler are not victims of the American dream. They are not crushed by society. They are not destroyed by circumstance or poverty or bad luck. They are destroyed by something far more ordinary and far more terrifying. They are destroyed by the life they chose and the lie they told themselves about why they had no choice. Sartre called this bad faith, and it is the most human thing we do. Bad faith in Sartre's philosophy is not lying to other people. It is lying to yourself about your own freedom. It is the act of pretending that you have no options when you do. It is the decision to become an object, a product of circumstance, a person to whom things happen, rather than a subject, a person who makes choices and owns them. Sartre believed that freedom is not something human beings want. It is something human beings flee, because freedom means responsibility. And responsibility means that you cannot point at the suburbs, the mortgage, the economy, the gender roles, the expectations of your parents, the pressures of society, and say, they did this to me. If you are free, then you did this to yourself. And that is unbearable. So we construct bad faith. We tell ourselves stories. We build elaborate internal architectures of excuse and circumstance and inevitability. We say, I had no choice. Anyone would have done the same. This is just how it is. This is what real life looks like. Frank and April Wheeler do this every single day of their marriage, and Yates watches them do it with the cold, unflinching attention of a documentary filmmaker who has no interest in making anyone feel better about what they are watching. This is not a novel about suburban misery. Thousands of novels are about suburban misery. This is a novel about the precise psychological mechanism by which intelligent, self-aware people construct the prison they live in, convince themselves someone else built it, and then spend their entire lives rattling the bars. What makes it devastating is not that Frank and April are weak, it is that they are exactly like you, and they are exactly like me, and the patterns Yates describes are not historical artifacts of 1950s America. They are the same patterns operating in every city, every generation, every time a person looks at their life and starts building a story about why they had no other option. This is what we are going to take apart today. Not the American dream, not gender roles, though we will get there, but the mechanism underneath all of it. The thing Yates was really diagnosing, the thing that makes this novel feel, 60 years after its publication, like it was written about last Tuesday. Before we can understand what Frank and April Wheeler become, we need to understand what they believe they are. They believe they are exceptional. This is the first and foundational lie. Not exceptional in an arrogant, open way. Exceptional in the quiet, privately held way that is far more dangerous because it never gets tested. It just accumulates. Frank Wheeler works at Knox Business Machines, in a job he has walked into with deliberate irony, the irony being that he, Frank Wheeler, is obviously too intelligent and too interesting and too alive for a company like Knox Business Machines. He is there temporarily, he is there provisionally, he is holding the position of a man with no imagination, while his real self, the essential Frank Wheeler, waits somewhere just off stage for the moment when the true life will begin. April Wheeler was an actress briefly, in a way that never quite solidified into anything real. She's beautiful in a way that people notice. She is perceptive in a way that makes ordinary conversations feel inadequate. She and Frank met and recognized in each other the same quality. The quality of being too good for the life that was being offered to them. Yates describes their early relationship with devastating precision. They meet at a party and they are immediately mutually performing for each other. Two people who have decided they are different from everyone else in the room and who are enormously relieved to have found someone who agrees. The relationship is built from its very first moment on a shared story about their own superiority to the ordinary. And this is where the bad faith begins, because the story is never tested. It is simply assumed and then protected. Frank does not actually do the thing he believes he is capable of. April April does not pursue the acting career with any real ferocity. They hold the belief in their own exceptionalism like a private treasure, something too precious and too fragile to expose to the brutality of actual effort and actual failure. Sartre would have recognized this immediately. The in itself in his philosophy is the thing that simply is what it is. A stone, a table, a fixed, determined object. The for itself is consciousness, the human being who is always becoming, always projecting forward, never simply what it is. The terror of being a for itself is that you are radically free and radically responsible. You cannot claim that you simply are a certain kind of person. You are always choosing, always creating yourself through action. Frank Wheeler wants to be exceptional without performing exceptionalism. He wants the identity without the work. He wants to be the person he believes he is rather than become the person his choices are making him. This is bad faith in its most recognizable form, and it is the form most of us practice every single day. The person who believes they are a writer but does not write. The person who believes they are capable of more but does not do more. The person who carries the belief in their own potential like a shield, protecting them from the failure that would result from actually trying. Because the belief is more comfortable than the test, Frank Wheeler is that person. And because he never tests the belief, it metastasizes, it becomes the lens through which he sees everything. The job is beneath him, the house is beneath him, the neighborhood, the commute, the conversations with the neighbors, the entirety of the life he has assembled is beneath him. He has contempt for all of it, but he chose it. He chose every piece of it, and the contempt is not a product of the life. The contempt is a product of the lie. It is the mechanism by which Frank maintains the fiction of his own exceptionalism without ever having to prove it. If the life is beneath him, then the fact that he is living it does not actually say anything about who he is. He is just temporarily housed here. He is passing through. April believes this too. For a while, for long enough. And then slowly, she starts to see something else. Here is the thing that almost every reading of Revolutionary Road gets wrong. April Wheeler is not a tragic victim of 1950s patriarchy. She is not simply a talented woman crushed by the domestic expectations of her era. She is those things, yes, and Yates is precise and devastating about the specific cruelty of what 1950s America asked women to be, but April Wheeler is also something more uncomfortable than a victim. April Wheeler is the person in the relationship who sees the truth. And seeing the truth in this novel is the most dangerous thing anyone can do. April is the one who first articulates what the Paris Plan actually is. She proposes that they sell the house, move to Paris, allow Frank to explore what he might actually want to be while she works to support them. It is presented in the novel and in most discussions of it as a dream, an aspiration, a beautiful, impossible escape. But look at what April is actually saying. She is saying, we are not living honestly. We are living a performance of a life rather than a life. Frank is not happy and he knows it and he is not doing anything about it, and I am not happy and I know it and I am not doing anything about it, and if we do not do something deliberately and soon, this is all there is going to be. April is not proposing Paris because Paris is magical. She is proposing Paris because Paris is concrete. It is a choice. It is a decision to stop pretending that they have no options and to exercise the freedom they actually have. Yates writes April's initial excitement about the plan with a quality that is different from Frank's. Frank's excitement has the quality of relief. Finally, a story that explains why he has not done anything yet. Finally, a reason that is external, a plan that is someone else's, a structure he can walk into rather than build. The Paris plan for Frank is another version of the waiting room. He is still waiting, just with a more romantic destination. For April, the Paris plan is a moment of clarity. It is her recognizing that the only way out of bad faith is to make an actual choice. A terrifying, irreversible, we might fail, catastrophically choice. And she is willing to make it. She is, in this precise moment, the only adult in the marriage. Yates writes, she was always able to see with a grave and pitying clarity that he was a man who had never grown up. This is not cruelty. This is diagnosis. April can see Frank with an accuracy that Frank cannot extend to himself, and she loves him anyway. And she is trying to give him the thing he says he wants, which is a life that matches his self-image. And Frank, confronted with the concrete reality of actually having to be the person he has always claimed to be, falls apart. Because the Paris plan, when it becomes real, when the house is actually listed and the tickets are actually being discussed, suddenly reveals everything Frank has been hiding from himself. And he does not actually know what he wants to do. He does not have a project waiting inside him. The exceptionalism has no content. It is just a feeling, a posture, a way of holding himself in relation to the life around him. And April, by taking the plan seriously, by refusing to let it remain safely in the territory of pleasant fantasy, forces Frank to see this, and he cannot survive the seeing. What Frank does next is one of the most honest and most brutal pieces of characterization in American fiction. He gets a promotion at Knox Business Machines, the job he has spent years treating with contemptuous irony, and he takes it. Not because he is forced to, not because April asks him to. He takes it because the promotion arrives at exactly the moment when Paris is about to become real, and the promotion gives him an external reason to stay. It gives him a circumstance he can point to. It gives him back the story. The promotion says, I would have gone, I wanted to go, but this happened and I had no choice. April sees exactly what he is doing, and Frank knows she sees it, and this is the moment the marriage becomes a war. Yates understood something about intimate relationships that most literature romanticizes away from. The most important battles in a marriage are not about money or sex or infidelity. They are about narrative. They are about which story of the relationship gets to be true. Every long-term relationship involves two people constructing a shared account of what they are doing together and why. And when those accounts diverge, when one person's story of the relationship fundamentally contradicts the other person's story, the relationship becomes a site of constant low-grade warfare, not because either person is cruel, but because each person's sanity depends on their version of events being confirmed. Frank's version. They are a slightly unconventional couple who have, through no particular fault of their own, ended up in slightly conventional circumstances, but who are different from their neighbours in ways that matter and who are temporarily pausing rather than permanently settling. April's version. They are two people who are living a lie, who have chosen comfort over truth, who are using the language of exceptionalism to avoid the responsibility of actually being exceptional, and who are running out of time to stop. These two versions cannot coexist. One of them has to be wrong. And so every conversation, every dinner party, every argument about the neighbours or the house or the children becomes a proxy battle for which version of the Wheelers is actually true. The fights in Revolutionary Road are unlike the fights in most domestic fiction. They are not about what they appear to be about. When Frank and April argue about the Paris plan, they are not arguing about Paris. They are arguing about whether Frank is the person he believes he is or the person April can see he is. When April goes quiet and cold after Frank's promotion, she is not being difficult. She is refusing to participate in a story she knows is false. Yates writes the arguments with clinical attention. He shows you exactly how each character talks past the other, how Frank performs passion when he is actually performing avoidance, how April's precision becomes cruelty in Frank's account of it. Because if April is not cruel, then Frank has to look at what she is actually saying. There is a scene, one of the most important scenes in the novel, where Frank and April have a spectacular extended argument after an amateur theatrical performance that April has been part of, a performance that has gone terribly wrong, and April stands very still in the aftermath and says something that cuts through everything. She says, in essence, look at us, look at what we have become, look at the distance between who we said we were and who we actually are. And Frank's response is to perform anguish, to turn the conversation into something about his feelings, his pain, his fear of what they are losing. And in doing this, he moves the conversation away from the question April has asked, because the question April has asked would require him to answer it. And he cannot answer it without acknowledging that she is right. This is bad faith in its most intimate and most destructive form. The refusal to see yourself clearly, maintained not through stupidity, but through the active, ongoing, effortful work of narrative management. Frank Wheeler is not an unintelligent man. He is in fact using his intelligence in service of his own blindness. And here is the thing about April that makes this novel so much more than a story about a difficult marriage. April is doing it too, just differently. April's bad faith is the belief that if she can just get them to Paris, if she can just create the external conditions for Frank to become the person she believes he could be, she will not have to grieve the person he actually is. She is pouring herself into the renovation of a man who has never asked to be renovated. She is making her own identity contingent on his transformation, and this is its own form of the lie. This is its own way of refusing to look at things as they are. Both of them are waiting for a future self to arrive and redeem the choices the present self is making. Both of them are living in the conditional tense. When Paris happens, when things change, when he becomes who he could be, when she finds the thing that makes her feel real again. But the conditional tense is the tense of bad faith. The present tense is the only one available. And the present tense of the Wheeler's life is a house in Revolutionary Road, a lawn that needs mowing, two children who are real and present and largely treated as accessories, and a marriage that is slowly running out of the language it needs to keep telling itself its own story. We need to talk about what April Wheeler is actually up against, because if we discuss bad faith and self-deception without acknowledging the specific, structural, violent narrowness of the world 1950s America offered women, we are doing something dishonest ourselves. April Wheeler is not free in the way that Frank Wheeler is not free. They are both trapped, but they are trapped differently. And the difference is important. Frank's trap is interior. It is the trap of his own ego, his own self-deception, his own unwillingness to make a real choice and live with its real consequences. He could, in principle, do something different. The options exist. He refuses them. April's trap is also interior, but it is reinforced at every turn by an exterior structure that is absolutely real. The 1950s suburban wife is not a metaphor. It is a set of concrete material constraints. April cannot simply decide to have a career the way Frank can decide to pursue his vague ambitions. She has children, she has a house, she has a social role that is policed not just by her husband, but by every woman on the street, by the Campbells next door, by the Mrs. Givings, who appears throughout the novel as a kind of chorus of socially enforced normalcy, a woman who has decided that adjustment to reality is not just necessary but virtuous, and who regards April's dissatisfaction as a personal affront and a social danger. Yates understands that what April finds most intolerable is not the housework or the social obligations or even Frank's failures. What she finds most intolerable is the requirement to perform contentment, to smile, to make the neighbours comfortable, to present a version of herself that is adjusted, grateful, appropriate, to pretend that the life is sufficient when every cell of her is screaming that it is not. She has a line in the novel that stops everything. She says, "I just want to feel things make sense." That is all she wants. Not glory, not escape, not Paris for its own sake, just the experience of living in a way that corresponds to something real in herself. And the world she is living in tells her consistently from every direction that the desire itself is the problem, that a woman who feels her life does not make sense is a woman who needs to adjust her expectations. Who needs to be grateful? Who needs to understand that this is what real life is, and the people who cannot accept that are the ones with the problem? This is a specific kind of psychological violence, not physical, not dramatic, but the sustained, quiet, daily violence of being told that your perception of reality is incorrect, that the life you are living is fine, and the fact that it does not feel fine is a symptom of something wrong with you. Yates shows us April absorbing this violence and for a while fighting back against it. The Paris plan is the fight. The arguments with Frank are the fight. The refusal to perform happiness she does not feel is the fight. And then the pregnancy happens and everything changes. The pregnancy in Revolutionary Road is one of the most morally and emotionally complex elements in the novel. April does not want the child, not because she does not love her existing children, but because she understands with absolute clarity that the pregnancy is already being used as the final nail. It is the circumstance that makes Paris definitively impossible. It is the external fact that turns the remaining story from "we chose this" to "we had no choice." And Frank, who has been desperate for exactly this kind of external circumstance, is relieved. He does not show this relief in any obvious way. He performs concern and care. But April sees the relief. She sees it because she has always seen Frank more clearly than Frank sees himself, and what she sees in that relief is the end. Not of the marriage, exactly, but of the possibility that the marriage was ever going to be honest. What April does next, I will not describe in clinical detail. The novel does not need me to. But it is essential to understand that April's final act is not despair. It is not a breakdown. It is, in its own terrible way, the most coherent thing she does in the entire novel. It is the one moment where she exercises absolute sovereignty over her own body, her own life, her own future, in a world that has spent years telling her those things are not hers to decide. Yates does not endorse this. He does not romanticize it. He simply shows it to you, and he makes you sit with what it means. What it means that a woman can reach a point where the only freedom available to her is this one. What it means that the exercise of that freedom is also the thing that destroys her. Yates puts into the novel a character who serves as a kind of diagnostic instrument, a man who says the true thing directly without the softening mechanisms of social performance because he is, by the world's accounting, mad. John Givings is the son of the real estate agent who sold the Wheelers their house. He has been institutionalized. He has had shock treatment. He is, in the world of the novel, someone whose perceptions are not to be trusted, someone to be handled carefully and watched nervously and ushered out of rooms when he starts speaking too directly. But John Givings is the only character in the novel who says what is actually true. When he visits the Wheelers and hears about the Paris plan, he is genuinely excited. Not in a polite social way, in the way of a person who recognizes something real. He says to Frank and April, with complete sincerity, that they are two of the few people he has ever met who are actually trying to live honestly, who are actually attempting to match their lives to their values. He is moved by them. He finds them extraordinary. And then, on a subsequent visit, when the Paris plan has collapsed and Frank and April are presenting the adjusted, settled, we are fine version of themselves, John Givings looks at them and sees what has happened. And he says so, directly, without the social cushioning that would make it bearable. He tells Frank that he has given up, that he has retreated into the safety of the ordinary, that the exceptional people John thought he had met have turned out to be exactly like everyone else. Frank is furious, April is devastated, and the Wheelers' response to John Givings, the speed with which they dismiss him, the relief they feel when he leaves, is one of the most precise pieces of characterization Yates ever wrote, because the reason John Givings is intolerable to them is not that he is mad, it is that he is right. His madness in this novel is a kind of permission. He is allowed to say the true thing because he has been categorized outside the social order that makes the true thing unspeakable. He is the person whose perceptions cannot be taken seriously, and this is precisely what makes him the only reliable witness. Yates uses him to articulate what every other character in the novel works so hard to avoid saying. The comfortable people on Revolutionary Road, the Campbells, Mrs. Givings, the colleagues and neighbours and acquaintances are all invested in the same story. The story that this is what life is, that adjustment is maturity, that the people who cannot find peace in the ordinary are the ones with the problem. And John Givings, sitting in the Wheeler living room with his brutal honesty and his shock treatment history and his mother hovering nervously at the edge of the conversation, says, "No, you were right the first time. The life you are living is not enough. And you know it, and you chose to stop knowing it. This is the thing that Frank cannot forgive, not the words themselves, but the accuracy of them, the way they land in the exact place where the lie is most fragile." Let me tell you what bad faith looks like in 2026. It looks like staying in the job you have convinced yourself you will leave next year, when the timing is better, when the economy improves, when you have saved enough, when things settle down. You have been saying this for 3 years. The timing has not gotten better, the economy has not improved, the saving has not happened, the things have not settled, but the story has stayed the same because the story is more comfortable than the question is avoiding, which is, what would happen if I actually left? Bad faith looks like the relationship where both people know, somewhere they do not look directly, that something is fundamentally wrong, but where looking directly at it would require a decision, and a decision would require acknowledging that they have the freedom to make it, and acknowledging that freedom is the most frightening thing in the world. So instead they book a holiday, they redecorate the living room, they talk about the relationship in terms of external stresses and busyness and need to communicate better, which is the language of bad faith because it takes the thing that is a choice and makes it a circumstance. Bad faith looks like the person who describes their life as something that happened to them rather than something they built. I ended up here, things just turned out this way, this is just how it is. Each of these phrases is a small act of self-erasure. Each of them places the person outside the story of their own life, in the passive position, the position of someone to whom the life occurred rather than someone who made it. Frank Wheeler does not end up in the house in Revolutionary Road. He chooses it. He chooses the job at Knox. He chooses to take the promotion. He chooses to use the pregnancy as a reason to abandon the only plan that might have broken him open into something real, and he wraps every single one of these choices in the language of circumstance, of inevitability, of what anyone would have done in his position. And this is what makes him so recognizable, not his particular circumstances, but the pattern, the shape of the self-deception, the specific human quality of the lie. You know this pattern because you have practiced it. I know this pattern because I have practiced it. Most of the people reading this right now are living inside some version of the Wheeler story. The story where the life you are living is not quite the life you meant to live. But the distance between the two is someone else's fault, or the economy's fault, or the timing's fault, or the fault of the children who arrived before you were ready, or the opportunity that never came, or the person you trusted who let you down. And the distance is real, the obstacles are real, the constraints are real. This is the thing that such as bad faith does not always account for cleanly, the fact that freedom is not equally distributed, that some people are working against structures that others are not, that April Wheeler's choices are genuinely more constrained than Frank Wheeler's, which is why the novel's treatment of her is so different from its treatment of him. But even within genuine constraint, even in the presence of real obstacles, there is usually a version of the true thing that we are avoiding. There is usually some question we are not asking because asking it would require us to act on the answer. There is usually some recognition we are holding at arm's length because if we let it all the way in, we would have to change. Yates does not offer a solution. He does not conclude with Frank Wheeler having a revelation and changing his life. He does not give you the satisfaction of transformation. He just shows you the pattern and leaves you with it because the pattern is the point. The pattern is the most important thing he is trying to show you. Richard Yates did not write Revolutionary Road to make you feel sad about the 1950s. He wrote it to make you feel seen. He wrote it as a mirror in which you would look for Frank and April Wheeler and find, with some discomfort, that the face looking back is your own. Bad faith is not a historical artifact. It is not something that happened to a generation of suburban housewives and their emotionally unavailable husbands and has since been resolved by social progress and better communication and the loosening of gender roles. It is a fundamental feature of the human mind, the mind that is always free, that is always choosing, and that finds this freedom so terrifying that it will construct almost any story to escape it. Frank Wheeler's story is that he is exceptional, that he is passing through, that the true life is coming. That story protects him from the recognition that the true life is the one he is already living, and that if he does not start choosing it honestly, it will simply end. April Wheeler's story is that she can save them both by being honest enough for two people, that if she can just hold the mirror steady long enough, Frank will finally look into it. That love paired with clarity will be sufficient to break them both free. She is wrong. You cannot be honest enough for two people. You cannot choose someone else's freedom for them. And the recognition of this, the full weight of understanding that she has been pouring herself into a project that was never going to work, is what you are left holding at the end of the novel. The revolutionary road of the title is not a street in Connecticut. It is not a metaphor for the American dream. It is the road that every person stands at the beginning of when they are young enough to believe that their life will be different, that they will choose differently, that they will not become the thing they can already see forming in the people around them. And then they choose, and they choose again. And they keep choosing each small choice a little less visible than the last until the choices have accumulated into a life, and the life has a mortgage and a lawn and children and a commute and a face in the mirror that is just slightly older than they expected. And somewhere late at night they think, is this it? And the answer that Yates gives, the true answer, the one that is also the beginning of something if you can bear to hear it, is this. Yes, this is it. You built it. You chose it. You are choosing it right now. And the question is not whether you could have done otherwise. The question is what you are going to do tomorrow.